It happened without a single raised voice. Behind the heavy oak doors of Buckingham Palace, Queen Camilla was handed a standard administrative dossier detailing the revised asset allocations of the Duchy of Cornwall. What looked like a routine bureaucratic update was actually a total dismantling of her empire. In less than 3 minutes, the woman who had spent 30 years clawing her way to the highest peak of British royalty realized that she had been structurally, financially, and permanently locked out. Her security clearance to specific private financial archives had been quietly revoked. A payroll sheet detailing the salaries of her most loyal private staff had been returned with a single, devastating red line drawn through the figures stamped with the authorization of the Prince of Wales. This is the story of a staggering exploitation of a weakened king, a secret power grab that almost succeeded, and the silent, ruthless retaliation executed by Prince William and Princess Anne. In the following moments, we are going to unpack exactly how Camilla attempted to secure her financial independence outside the crown's control, how the future king uncovered the paper trail, and the devastating realization that the woman wearing the crown actually owns absolutely nothing. To understand the sheer gravity of her sudden collapse, you have to first recognize the staggering illusion of absolute power she had constructed around herself. For nearly 3 decades, Camilla operated with the confidence of an untouchable strategist. She was the shadow that eclipsed Diana, the controversial figure who forced the most rigid and unforgiving institution on earth to bend entirely to her will. By the time the St. Edward's crown was placed on her head at Westminster Abbey, she believed the long war was finally won. She had Charles completely controlled. She had engineered her public rehabilitation from the most despised woman in Britain to Queen Consort with a relentless, expensive public relations machine. She began operating not merely as a spouse, but as a sovereign. Viewers noticed subtle but aggressive pushes to elevate her non-royal children into the institutional fold, placing them prominently at royal events. She systematically worked toward the institutional erasure of the woman who came before her, assuming that a new title would rewrite history. In her mind, she was the ultimate victor. She carried herself with an aristocratic invincibility completely detached from the reality that her entire existence within the palace walls was funded by an estate she did not control. But absolute power requires absolute financial leverage. And as the king's health visibly deteriorated behind the palace gates, Camilla's commercial desperation began to seep through the cracks of her carefully managed image. She knew Charles was running out of time, and with his decline, her protective shield was fracturing. What she attempted next was a quiet but massive transfer of institutional wealth. What appears to be true based on the sudden restructuring of palace administration is that Camilla initiated aggressive moves to redirect private funding streams. She sought to quietly funnel assets from the crown estate into private trusts that would guarantee her untouchable financial autonomy long after Charles was gone. She wanted a permanent, irrevocable claim to elite royal properties, actively maneuvering to secure a sprawling estate for her own lineage, sidestepping the rigid protocols that govern royal residences. She sought a guaranteed private stipend that bypassed the strict oversight of the Duchy of Cornwall. It was an audacious play to turn a temporary royal privilege into permanent dynastic wealth. She was banking on the assumption that a grieving, distracted family would not notice the shifting of funds until the ink was already dry. The fatal flaw in her strategy was forgetting who actually controlled the ledger. When Charles ascended to the throne, he passed the Duchy of Cornwall, the billion-dollar financial engine of the monarchy, directly to William. William did not manage the duchy like an aristocratic inheritance. He managed it like a forensic accountant inheriting a compromised corporation. During a comprehensive audit of projected private expenditures, William's financial team flagged a series of highly irregular, expedited property and trust transfers that required the Prince of Wales's countersignature. William did not confront her. He did not rush to the press to leak the betrayal. Instead, he systematically traced every single administrative request she had made over the past year. He uncovered a shadow architecture of financial demands designed to bleed the estate before the inevitable transition of power. What he found was not just standard royal greed. It was a calculated threat to the financial sovereignty of the crown itself. William brought this paper trail directly to Princess Anne. If William is the executor of the monarchy's future, Anne is the ruthless guardian of its history. Princess Anne has always operated with a fierce, uncompromising protection of the crown, viewing any attempt to exploit the institution with cold disgust. When she reviewed the documents detailing Camilla's attempted financial maneuvering, the retaliation was set into motion. It is vital to understand that they did not retaliate with screaming matches in the drawing room. They retaliated with the devastating weaponization of administrative protocol. They used the very system Camilla thought she had conquered to completely suffocate her. William's retaliation was a masterclass in weaponized restraint. Using his absolute authority over the duchy, William froze all pending property allocations tied to Camilla's private requests. He systematically revoked her access to the discretionary funds she had quietly been using to elevate her own family's profile. The humiliation was executed flawlessly through standard protocol. When Camilla attempted to finalize the staffing budget for her private retreat, the request was simply denied due to budget reallocation. She was stripped of her autonomous payroll. Senior courtiers who had previously answered directly to her were suddenly reassigned to William's executive team under the guise of institutional streamlining. That detail matters immensely. By removing her staff and cutting her funding, William effectively placed her under an administrative siege. She was slowly being suffocated by red tape, completely unable to fight back without exposing her own financial desperation to the public. She could not complain to the press without revealing that she was trying to siphon money from the crown. She could not demand her staff back without admitting she had lost control of them. Every move she made was blocked by a polite, protocol-driven email from William's office. The contrast of schadenfreude here is staggering. The woman who employed the most expensive billionaire public relations strategies in the world was suddenly facing the broke reality of a consort who owned absolutely nothing. The psychological toll of this silent execution was immense. While Catherine was quietly and uncomplainingly sacrificing her privacy to navigate a brutal health battle, securing the enduring love and respect of the British public, Camilla was panicking over property deeds in the shadows. The moral outrage of William and Anne was not just about the money. It was about the staggering disrespect shown to Catherine and the legacy of Diana. Camilla had mistaken William's silent, enduring grief for weakness. She assumed his focus on his wife's health would leave the financial doors unguarded. Instead, he used that exact moment to lock every door in the palace, changing the codes while she was standing on the outside. The moment the trap snapped shut was visually devastating. Accounts suggest that Camilla, realizing the extent of the administrative blockade, attempted to bypass William entirely and use her private entrance to access the duchy offices. She was politely informed by security that her access had been updated, and she was guided toward a side door meant for standard visitors. Inside, a portrait of her that had previously hung in the private administrative wing had been quietly taken down, replaced by a historical map of the duchy estates. These were not accidents. These were symbolic psychological clues and forensic proof of shifting power. They were messages written in the cold language of the institution, telling her that her reign was effectively over before it had even finished. Camilla was left standing in a hallway holding a denied budget request, realizing that the illusion of power she had spent a lifetime building had been dismantled by a few strokes of a pen. She had no leverage left. Her only remaining move was to turn to the one man who had always surrendered to her demands. She turned to King Charles. When Camilla entered the king's private sitting room, she was not looking for a compromise. She was looking for a royal command. She carried with her the undeniable proof of William's insubordination the rejected budget proposals, the revoked security clearances, and the reassignment of her most senior staff. For 30 years, this was the exact dynamic that had guaranteed her survival. Whenever the palace machinery attempted to marginalize her, whenever the public demanded her removal, she would turn to Charles. And Charles, blinded by a lifelong, uncompromising devotion, would always step in to shield her, overriding his advisors, his mother, and his own sons. She laid the administrative paperwork in front of the king, expecting him to pick up the phone, summon the Prince of Wales, and demand the immediate reinstatement of her financial autonomy and institutional access. Instead, Charles looked down at the documents, and then he looked at her. And he did absolutely nothing. The silence that filled that room was the most devastating psychological climax of Camilla's entire royal existence. Charles did not rage against his son. He did not offer words of comfort to his wife. Accounts of the shifting power dynamics within the palace suggest that Charles, physically exhausted and deeply aware of his own fragile mortality, simply accepted the paperwork. He recognized William's signature, and more importantly, he recognized the absolute finality it represented. The king knew that William was not acting out of temporary anger. The future monarch was executing a precise, legally binding containment strategy to protect the crown's assets. For Charles to intervene now would mean initiating an open civil war with the very son who was currently holding the monarchy together. He looked at the woman he had torn his life apart for, the woman he had dragged to the throne through decades of public hatred, and he chose the survival of the institution over her comfort. In that quiet, unremarkable moment of surrender, Charles effectively abdicated his authority in everything but name. For Camilla, this was a terminal diagnosis for her influence. The devastating realization that Charles would no longer save her triggered a profound commercial desperation. To the outside world, she was still the queen consort, dripping in historical jewels, waving from the balcony of Buckingham Palace. But, behind closed doors, the forensic reality of her situation was terrifyingly clear. She owns virtually nothing of consequence. The grand estates, the sprawling country homes, the private jets, and the endless stream of capital are not hers. The crown estate belongs to the sovereign and the Duchy of Cornwall. The billion-dollar engine that funds the family's private lives belongs entirely to William. Her own private residence, Ray Mill House, is a minor country property compared to the vast architectural empire of the monarchy. She had spent decades behaving like the absolute owner of a corporation, only to be brutally reminded that she is, in financial terms, merely a temporary tenant relying entirely on the grace of the landlord. And the new landlord was a man who had spent his entire life waiting to evict her influence. William's approach to dismantling her power left absolutely zero room for emotional appeals. He was running the royal apparatus like a ruthless chief executive who had just inherited a compromised company. He did not need to scream or leak scandalous stories to the tabloids. He simply audited her. He tightened the reporting structures, demanded professional accountability for every pound spent, and removed the discretionary funds that allowed unaccountable courtiers to do her bidding. By enforcing strict corporate governance on the royal household, William created a shield of administrative protocol that Camilla could not penetrate. If she complained that she was being financially starved, William's team could simply point to standard budget optimizations. She was entirely trapped by the very system she had spent 30 years trying to master. While Camilla was suffocating under this administrative siege, a new order was quietly cementing itself within the palace walls. As Camilla shrank into institutional irrelevance, Catherine expanded to fill the void with an unbothered, effortless grace, returning to the public eye after a brutal and highly publicized health battle. Catherine's standing within the monarchy and the public consciousness had elevated to a level of near untouchability. She did not need to fight for relevance. The cameras, the crowds, and the senior palace staff naturally gravitated toward her. But the shift in power was not just atmospheric. It was strictly protocol-driven. Insiders noted subtle but profound changes in how the monarchy operated around the two women. One of the most glaring examples was access to the royal collection, the heavily guarded vault of historical jewels. Access to these pieces is entirely at the discretion of the monarch, but with Charles delegating increasingly massive portions of his authority to his heir, William effectively became the gatekeeper to the family's most sacred historical assets. Suddenly, the most significant and iconic pieces, the ones that signal true institutional dominance, were exclusively adorning Catherine. Every time Catherine stepped out, wearing a piece of jewelry, strongly associated with the late Queen Elizabeth or Princess Diana, it was a carefully coded message to the world, and more importantly, to Camilla. It was a visual confirmation of who actually held the master keys. Catherine was taking her rightful place at the absolute center of the royal framework, and she was doing it without ever having to raise her voice or engage in petty palace warfare. She let William's ledger do the talking. This silent execution carries a devastating, deeper meaning that resonates far beyond a simple dispute over budgets and staffing. What the world is witnessing is William executing the justice his mother never received. He is not doing it through explosive television interviews or tell-all memoirs. He is doing it with chilling, methodical institutional discipline. For decades, William endured the presence of the woman who tormented Diana, maintaining a mask of polite acceptance for the sake of the crown and his father's fragile happiness. He watched Camilla systematically attempt to erase Diana's legacy and replace it with her own. But William never forgot, and he never forgave. Now holding the absolute financial and administrative power of the monarchy in his hands, he is dismantling Camilla's legacy brick by brick. He is protecting his wife from the exact same institutional sabotage that destroyed his mother. As the king's reign inevitably moves toward its twilight, whether through a formalized abdication or the natural progression of time, Camilla's future has already been written. When William officially ascends the throne, she will face the ultimate downgrade. As a dowager queen without the protection of her husband, her relevance, her funding, and her housing will exist entirely at the mercy of King William and Queen Catherine. The woman who clawed her way to the crown will find herself quietly managed out of the institution, banished to the margins of royal history, remembered not as the triumphant victor she believed herself to be, but as a temporary liability that the monarchy eventually corrected. The illusion of absolute power has been permanently shattered. Thank you for watching. If you found this breakdown of the hidden power dynamics inside the palace insightful, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an analysis. Leave your thoughts on William's silent strategy in the comments below, and I will see you in the next video.